Sergeant Daniel Cross had been on the alien world of Rixora for only 3 months, and already he was convinced this was the strangest deployment of his life. He had been sent here as part of a peace exchange between the United Human Alliance and the Rixoran Empire, a massive star-spanning kingdom ruled by a single monarch, Queen Lithara Vera. Rixora was beautiful, but dangerous. The skies were always shifting colors, from deep violet in the mornings to shimmering silver at night. The air was heavy, full of scents Daniel didn't recognize. Some days it smelled like flowers, other days like metal. The Rixorans themselves were tall, elegant beings with smooth skin that shimmered faintly under light, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. Humans were rare here. In fact, Daniel was one of only 7 on the entire planet, all assigned to different areas. His post was in the Royal Guard, though in truth, no one seemed to know exactly what to do with him. The other alien soldiers treated him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. That morning, Daniel had been standing at his usual place near the Great Hall's massive double doors when something unusual happened. A group of tall palace attendants approached him, their steps quick, their faces tense. "You," one of them said sharply. "The Queen summons you." "Now?" Daniel frowned. "The Queen? Are you sure you've got the right guy?" The attendant's golden eyes narrowed. "She knows who she calls. Follow." Daniel adjusted the strap on his uniform and followed them through long hallways lined with alien banners and glowing crystal pillars. Every step he took, he felt more out of place. What could the Queen possibly want with him? He was just an exchange soldier, not an important diplomat. When they entered the throne chamber, Daniel's first instinct was to stop and stare. The room was enormous, the ceiling disappearing into shadows. Giant banners hung on each side, showing the royal crest, a silver crescent encircling a star. The floor was polished so smooth that it reflected the room like a black mirror. And at the far end, seated on a high throne, carved from a single piece of deep blue crystal, was Queen Lithara herself. Daniel had seen her before from a distance, but never this close. She was striking tall, even by Rixoran standards, with long hair the color of midnight, shimmering skin, and eyes like molten silver. There was a calm, commanding aura around her, the kind that made you want to straighten your back without thinking. But today, she did not look calm. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. Faint shadows marked the space under her eyes. The attendants brought Daniel forward until he stood at the foot of the throne. He bowed, though awkwardly humans were still learning Rixoran customs. "Your Majesty," Daniel said carefully. The Queen studied him in silence for a long moment. The hall was so quiet that Daniel could hear the soft hum of the crystal pillars. Finally she spoke. "Sergeant Daniel Cross of Earth." Her voice was smooth but carried power. "I have a task for you." Daniel hesitated. "I'm listening." "Son," she continued, "has not stopped crying for 3 days." Daniel blinked. "Your son?" "Prince Kale," she said, her tone softening slightly at the name. "He is unique, sensitive to emotions. No healer, no nurse, no warrior has been able to soothe him." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't sure why she was telling him this. Surely this was not a problem for a soldier. Then, the Queen's gaze sharpened. "2 nights ago, you walked past the nursery. The moment you did, he stopped." Daniel frowned. "That wasn't on purpose." "I do not care if it was," she said, leaning forward slightly. "The fact remains. You calmed him, even if only for a moment. And so, I present you with a challenge." Daniel was still trying to process this when she spoke the next words. Words that nearly made his brain short-circuit. "If you can calm my child," she said, her voice carrying across the entire hall, "I will promise you my hand in marriage." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. Daniel stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "Wait, did you just—" "I did," she said simply. Daniel's thoughts went into chaos. Marriage to the Queen of an alien empire? Over babysitting? This had to be some kind of cultural misunderstanding. Around the hall, Alien nobles murmured to each other, their expressions ranging from amused to hostile. Daniel caught sight of one tall figure sneering at him, probably one of the queens. "Political rivals, Your Majesty," Daniel said slowly. "With all due respect, I'm not sure I'm— Are you refusing a royal request?" she asked, tilting her head. Daniel swallowed. "No, ma'am." "Then you will come," she said, standing gracefully. Her attendants moved at once, signaling for Daniel to follow. They led him through more corridors, this time smaller and quieter, until they reached a pair of tall silver doors carved with patterns of stars. The moment the doors opened, a sharp, high-pitched wail filled the air. Daniel winced. The sound wasn't just loud, it seemed to vibrate inside his skull. Inside, the nursery was a strange mix of luxury and chaos. Soft fabrics in deep blues and silvers draped over curved walls. Floating toys hovered in the air, glowing faintly. And in the center, inside a cradle shaped like a blooming flower, was the source of the sound, Prince Kale. He was small, his skin a lighter shade than the queen's, almost pearl-colored, and his hair a soft silver. But his eyes, large and luminous, were full of distress. With each cry, faint ripples moved through the air, as though the sound itself bent space. The queen stood at the edge of the cradle, her hands resting lightly on its rim. "Kale," she murmured, but her son's cries only grew louder. Daniel stepped forward cautiously. "May I?" The queen gave a small nod. Daniel crouched beside the cradle. The baby's luminous eyes locked onto him for a moment, but the crying didn't stop. Daniel tried to think, what would calm a human baby? He remembered his little sister when she was a toddler, remembered his mother's soft voice singing late at night. He took a slow breath, then began to hum. Just a simple earth lullaby, nothing fancy. At first nothing happened. But after a few seconds, Kale's cries faltered. His bright eyes blinked up at Daniel, and a faint, curious sound escaped his throat, not a cry, but almost a questioning coo. Daniel kept humming, his voice low and steady. Slowly, the tension in the baby's tiny body eased. Within a minute, the nursery was silent, except for the soft tune. The queen's eyes widened. She didn't speak, but Daniel saw her shoulders relax for the first time since he'd entered the hall. He gently reached into the cradle, letting Kale grasp his finger. The baby's grip was surprisingly strong, and his eyes stayed fixed on Daniel as if trying to memorize his face. Behind him, one of the attendants whispered, "Impossible." Daniel finally stopped humming, though he kept his voice low. As he spoke, looks like he just needed a change of sound. "Maybe humans hit a frequency he likes." The queen stepped closer. "Or perhaps," she said softly, "you are simply the one he trusts." Daniel blinked at her. "Me? We just met." "Trust is not always built over time," she replied. "Sometimes it happens the instant two hearts meet." The baby yawned, his tiny hand still holding Daniel's finger. The queen's silver gaze locked onto Daniel. "You have done what no one else could. The offer I made still stands." Daniel's brain stumbled again over the words. "You mean the marriage thing?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Do you find it so unthinkable?" Yeah. "Kind of," Daniel admitted. "Where I'm from, calming a baby doesn't usually lead to royal weddings." Her smile didn't fade. "On Rixora, bonds are sacred. And you have just formed one with my son. That makes you important." Daniel looked back at the baby, now peacefully asleep, and felt the weight of the moment settle on him. He didn't understand all the customs here, didn't know what this would mean for his life. But one thing was clear. Whatever just happened, it had set something in motion that could not easily be undone. And in the quiet of the nursery with the queen, watching him closely, Daniel realized this was only the beginning. The next morning, Daniel wasn't sure if yesterday had actually happened or if it had been some strange dream brought on by exhaustion. But when two palace attendants arrived at his quarters and told him the queen expected him in the nursery, immediately he knew it was real. He dressed quickly in his dark blue guard uniform, brushed a hand through his hair, and followed them through the winding palace corridors. The air here was warmer than outside, carrying a faint, sweet scent that he had begun to associate with the Queen's private wing. When they reached the silver nursery doors, Daniel could already hear the cries, sharp, high-pitched, and pulsing, in a way that made the walls hum faintly. Inside, the Queen stood near the cradle, her posture tense but controlled. Around her, 3 alien attendants looked helpless. One was shaking a strange floating toy shaped like a glowing sphere. Another was making a soft trilling noise with their throat. The third was trying to feed the baby from a crystal bottle, and if it worked. Kale's luminous eyes were wet with tears, his tiny hands flailing as his cries sent little waves of shimmering air through the room. The Queen glanced up as Daniel entered. "Sergeant Cross. He has been like this since dawn." Daniel approached slowly. "All right, little guy, let's try this again." He crouched beside the cradle, ignoring the way the attendants watched him like he was performing magic. He started, humming the same tune as before, low, slow, steady. Almost immediately, Kale's cries lessened. His wide eyes turned toward Daniel, and within moments, the sound faded into soft whimpers. Then, unbelievably, the baby let out a tiny laugh, a light, musical sound that made even the Queen's eyes widen in surprise. "I've never heard him laugh before," the Queen said quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Guess he likes my singing," one of the attendants murmured. "This is unnatural," another whispered back. "It is extraordinary." The Queen stepped closer. "You will come every day," she said, as if it were already decided. Daniel blinked. "Every day?" "Yes, at this hour. He responds to you, and that is a gift we cannot ignore." Her gaze was steady. "Will you accept?" Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no, after all. He was here as a soldier, not a babysitter. But another part, the one looking down at the baby now calmly grasping his finger, found it hard to refuse. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come." That Queen gave a single nod. "Good, and you will not just calm him. You will bond with him. Learn his ways, his moods. He must know you are safe for him." Daniel frowned slightly. "Why is that so important?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "'Cause there are those who wish him harm, and a child who knows trust can also know fear and avoid danger." Her tone made the hairs on the back of Daniel's neck stand up. Days turned into a routine in the days that followed. Daniel settled into an unexpected new life. Each morning, he reported to the nursery at the same time. He would hum or talk softly to Kale, sometimes making little faces or rocking him gently in his arms. The baby responded in ways no one else could achieve, cooing, smiling, even reaching for Daniel the moment he entered. It didn't go unnoticed. Every time Daniel left the nursery, he could feel the eyes of the court on him. Alien nobles in flowing robes would watch him with unreadable expressions. Some looked curious, others not so friendly. One afternoon, as Daniel walked through one of the palace gardens, a tall Rixaron male stepped into his path. His skin was a deep bronze, his hair braided with silver bands, and his eyes burned with something close to hostility. "You are the human," the man said. Daniel stopped. "I guess so." "I am Lord Varen," the man continued, "cousin to the Queen, her most trusted advisor, and her intended." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Intended?" "Yes," Varen said, his voice low, "until you appeared and began interfering." Daniel let out a short laugh. "I'm just calming a baby. That's not exactly stealing anyone's job." Varen stepped closer, his shadow falling over Daniel. "You are being used, human. The Queen has political enemies. May promise you her hand, but that promise will be broken when it suits her. Stay away from the child and from her." Daniel's jaw tightened. Not happening. For a moment, Varen's eyes flared brighter, but then he stepped back. "You have been warned." He turned and walked away, his long robes whispering. Against the stone path, a rare glimpse of the Queen that evening, Daniel returned to the nursery for an unscheduled visit. He found the Queen alone, holding Kale and speaking softly in her native tongue. She looked up in mild surprise. You are not due until morning. Daniel shrugged. Thought I'd check in. Will reach toward him immediately, and the queen allowed Daniel to take the child. The baby settled against him with a soft sigh. You trust easily? She said, watching him. I think he just knows I'm not here to hurt him, Daniel replied. The queen's gaze softened, but there was a shadow behind her eyes. When Kale's father died, many saw weakness in the throne. There are those who believe a child emperor is an opportunity, and they would not hesitate to remove him to gain control. Daniel's grip on the baby tightened slightly. That's why you want him to trust someone else, in case you're not there. She inclined her head. Exactly. For a moment, they stood in silence. A soldier from Earth and a queen from another world, united by the presence of a small, sleeping child. The whispering court the next few days brought more attention than Daniel liked. Servants whispered as he passed. Soldiers he didn't know saluted him awkwardly. And always, there were the nobles watching, judging, calculating. Some approached him politely, asking about his homeworld or his military service. Others spoke in half-questions and careful hints, trying to measure how much influence he had over the queen. One evening, a young female noble named Cirrus cornered him in a hallway. Do you know, she said in a silky voice, that if the queen keeps her promise, you'll become not just her consort, but father to the emperor of Rixora? Daniel stared at her. That's why I dare wad to regat. Wide I water wider right at. You should, she said, smiling faintly. Because every ally you make now, or enemy, will matter then. The baby's first laughter in public, the turning point, came during a formal dinner in the grand hall. The queen attended with Kale in her arms, the baby unusually fussy in the noisy, crowded room. Nobles began to exchange irritated looks as the crying grew louder. Finally, the queen gestured for Daniel, who had been standing with the other guards. Daniel approached, bowed, and took the child. As soon as he started humming, the crying stopped. Then Kale did something no one expected. He laughed. Not once, but several times, a bright, joyful sound that echoed through the hall. The reaction was immediate. Some nobles smiled despite themselves. Others whispered furiously. The queen's expression was unreadable, but her gaze on Daniel was steady and unblinking. When Daniel handed Kale back, the queen said softly, "You are becoming essential." Daniel wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a dangerous one, but one thing was certain. Whatever bond he had with this child, it was changing everything, and somewhere in the shadows of the court, someone was already planning to use that bond against him. The palace mornings had become strangely predictable for Daniel. He would wake before dawn, dress in his dark blue uniform, and walk the long, echoing halls toward the nursery. Guards at every doorway would nod respectfully or suspiciously, depending on whose side they were on. Inside the nursery, Kale would always be waiting. Some days the baby would be fussing, other days he'd be quietly looking at the floating toys. But the moment Daniel entered, those bright eyes would lock onto him, the little hands would reach out. At first, Daniel thought it was just instinct. Babies liked familiar faces. But over time, he began to notice more. Kale would mimic the sound of Daniel's humming. He would calm even before Daniel touched him, as if he could sense the human's mood. The queen noticed it too. "He is learning you," she said one morning, watching as Daniel made Kale giggle by tapping his nose. Daniel smiled. "Guess we're friends now?" Her gaze softened, but she didn't smile. A prince has no friends, only allies and enemies. Remember that. Whispers in the court. Daniel soon realized that his daily visits were not just noticed, they were discussed in the royal dining hall. He would sometimes hear his name whispered, The human has bewitched the air, one noble murmured. Or, the queen, another replied. There was laughter, but it wasn't friendly. Lord Varen, the queen's cousin, had not spoken to Daniel since their confrontation in the gardens. But Daniel often caught the man watching him with a calculating look. One afternoon, while leaving the nursery, Daniel was stopped by a soldier he didn't know, tall, armored in black, his expression neutral. Sergeant Krause, the soldier, said a word of advice. We're being drawn into something larger than you understand. When that happens, you either choose a side, or a side is chosen for you. Daniel didn't answer. He just kept walking, Cale's tiny laughter from earlier still echoing in his head. The Queen's confession one rainy evening. The Queen asked Daniel to stay after Cale had fallen asleep. The nursery lights had been dimmed and the sound of rain against the crystal windows filled the air. I want you to understand something, she began. When Cale's father died, the throne became vulnerable.
How many believe I should remarry quickly to strengthen my rule?
Some see your presence as a distraction from proper alliances. Daniel leaned against the cradle's edge and Do you see me as a distraction? She met his eyes for a long moment. I see you as someone my son trusts. That alone makes you valuable and dangerous to my enemies. Daniel frowned. Dangerous how? If they cannot control me, she said quietly, they will try to control you. If they cannot control you, they will remove you. There was no emotion in her voice, but the warning was clear. The laughter that changed the hollow week later, a grand court gathering was held. Nobles from across the empire filled the hall, their flowing robes brushing against the polished floor. It was meant to be a display of stability, the Queen's way of showing the empire that she and her heir were strong. Cale was brought into the hall, carried by a nurse, but the noise of so many voices made him restless, and soon the cries began. The Queen's gaze flicked toward Daniel, who was standing with the guards. With a small motion of her hand, she summoned him forward. Daniel stepped through the crowd. Ignoring the stares, he reached for Cale, holding him gently, and began his quiet humming. The crying stopped almost instantly. Then, to the shock of everyone present, Cale laughed. The sound was clear, bright, the kind of pure joy that seemed to cut through all the tension in the room. Some nobles smiled despite themselves. Others whispered more urgently, the political meaning already forming in their minds. Daniel handed the baby back to the Queen. She took him with a nod, but her eyes never left Daniel's face. That night, as he left the hall, Daniel overheard a voice say, "If the Queen marries him, everything changes." The threat the next morning, Daniel found a note slipped under his chamber door. The paper was black, the writing in a silvery script. "Leave the palace, human, or the child will suffer." He read it twice, then burned it in the small wall brazier. But he couldn't burn the unease it left behind. That day in the nursery, he found himself watching the doors more than usual. Even Cale seemed to sense his mood, gripping Daniel's uniform tightly whenever anyone entered. When he mentioned the note to the Queen later, her eyes narrowed. "Do not speak of this to anyone else. I will handle it." Daniel wasn't sure what handle it meant in Rixaron politics, but the cold edge in her voice told him she wasn't taking it lightly. The Queen's test 2 days later. The Queen gave Daniel an unusual request. "Take Cale into the gardens," she said. "Without guards." Daniel blinked. "Without guards?" "Yes. I want to see how you move when you are alone with him. How you protect him." He didn't argue. Soon, he was carrying Cale through the palace gardens. The air full of strange alien flowers that glowed faintly under the afternoon light. At first, it was peaceful.
Ow.
But then Daniel noticed movement near one of the tall archways, a shadow. Slipping behind a pillar, he stopped walking, scanning the area. Cale shifted against his chest, making a soft sound. Daniel started humming quietly, partly to keep the baby calm, and partly to steady himself. The shadow moved again, closer. This time, Daniel shifted Cale into one arm and reached for the small blade at his side. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow retreated. Daniel exhaled slowly. keeping his grip on the blade until he was sure they were alone. When they returned to the nursery, the queen was waiting. "You saw them," she said simply. Daniel nodded. "You set that up, didn't you?" Her expression didn't change. "I needed to know if you would freeze or act. You acted." A dangerous attachment that night. Daniel lay awake in his quarters, thinking about how far things had come. He had arrived here as a simple soldier, part of a peace program. Now, he was carrying the future ruler of an alien empire through gardens. While mysterious figures tested his reactions, Cale had gone from a stranger's child to someone. Daniel felt responsible for not just as a job, but in his own heart, and he knew that attachment could be used against him still. When he thought of Cale's laughter, of the way the baby's tiny hands grabbed his uniform and wouldn't let go, Daniel knew he couldn't just walk away, even if it meant stepping deeper into the dangerous game of the Rixaran court. The royal hall was not just a room, it was a place of legends. Tall crystal pillars reached up to a ceiling painted with glowing stars. Blue silk banners with golden edges hung on the walls, telling the history of the queen's victories. Soldiers lined the path, standing straight, their armor shining under the soft light. Ethan stood at the far end, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. He had been summoned here after the queen's attendants announced he had passed her first test, calming the baby. But he knew in his heart this was not the end. The queen would not promise marriage so easily. The queen sat upon a throne carved from silver and black stone. Her long teal-blue gown shimmered like water under the sun. On her head, a crown shaped like wings curved upward. Her eyes, bright as green fire, focused on Ethan as if she could read his soul. Beside her sat the royal baby's cradle now. Calm, now quiet. The tiny child lay sleeping, wrapped in a blanket of soft purple cloth. The sight made Ethan's chest feel warm. Couldn't explain why, but he felt strangely protective of that child. The queen spoke. Human. Her voice was firm yet smooth, echoing across the hall. "You have done what none of my people could do. My daughter sleeps peacefully because of you. But one act does not prove your worth." Ethan took a step forward. "I understand, Your Majesty." The queen's lips curved slightly, almost like a hidden smile. "Then hear my next challenge. You must spend one full night in the Crystal Garden, alone, with my daughter." A murmur ran through the gathered court. The Crystal Garden was not a place for the faint-hearted. It was beautiful, yes. But it was also guarded by wild beasts, strange creatures that even the queen's guards avoided unless armed. Ethan frowned. "Alone? No guards? None?" the queen said. "You must protect her yourself. If you survive until dawn and the child remains unharmed, then you may stay in my court as a guest. Fail, and you will leave my palace forever." Ethan's heart pounded. He glanced at the sleeping baby. He had no armor, no weapon, only his own hands. But he remembered something. The baby had trusted him once before. Maybe that trust could guide him again. "I accept," Ethan said. The queen's gaze sharpened, testing his resolve. "Very well. Test begins at sunset." The garden of light and shadows as the twin suns of the alien world began to sink behind the horizon. The sky turned into shades of purple and gold. The queen's attendants led Ethan and the baby to the gates of the Crystal Garden. The gates were tall, made of silver vines twisted into strange shapes. Beyond them, giant crystal flowers glowed faintly in the deepening dusk. The air shimmered with energy. One attendant, a tall woman with silver hair, handed him a small blanket. "The child. You'll need to keep her warm." Ethan nodded and took the baby into his arms. She stirred a little, tiny hands curling against him, but she didn't cry. The gates opened with a slow, deep sound. Ethan stepped inside. The moment the gates closed behind him, silence fell. No voices, no footsteps. Just the faint hum of the crystals around him. He began walking, his eyes scanning for danger. The garden was breathtaking. Tall stalks of glowing plants, pools of water that shone like liquid glass, and strange vines that seemed to move slowly as if alive. But beauty often hid danger. He remembered what the queen's guards had whispered. While leading him here, the beasts come out after dark. First signs of danger hours passed slowly. Ethan walked along the crystal paths, rocking the baby when she stirred. At first, there was nothing but the soft sound of her breathing and the distant trickle of water. Then a rustle. Ethan froze. From the shadows between two crystal trees, something stepped out. It was tall, with 6 thin legs, and a body covered in scales that shimmered like metal. Its head was narrow, with eyes that glowed orange. The creature made a low clicking sound. Ethan's instincts told him it was a predator. He tightened his grip on the baby and slowly backed away. Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. But the creature stepped closer, its head lowering. It sniffed the air, its gaze fixed on the bundle in Ethan's arms. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't fight it, not while holding the baby. So he did the only thing he could think of. Pulled the blanket tighter around her, hiding her scent. Then, using his free hand, he grabbed a nearby fallen crystal shard from the ground. It wasn't a sword, but it was sharp. The creature hissed and lunged. Ethan sidestepped, slashing the shard across its snout. The beast shrieked and leaped backward, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan's breathing was fast, his heart pounding, but the baby was still calm. She hadn't cried once, a strange connection as night deepened. More sounds came from the shadows, low growls, splashes in the water, wings beating in the air. But none of the creatures came too close again. Ethan began to notice something strange. The glowing crystals near him seemed to shine brighter when the baby was awake, dimmer when she slept. Once, when he whispered to her, the air around them seemed warmer, softer, and the rustling in the distance grew quieter. "Are you keeping them away?" he murmured to the child. She blinked up at him, her eyes a soft green like her mother's. A tiny smile appeared on her face. Ethan didn't know if she understood him, but in that moment, felt certain she was more than just a baby. Hours passed in this way, him walking, holding her, whispering gently whenever she stirred. The night was long. No beast dared attack again. Dawn in the garden, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, touching the crystals with golden fire. The gates of the garden creaked open, and the queen herself stood there, her gown flowing. In the morning breeze, Ethan stepped forward, tired but unhurt. The baby was still in his arms, awake and calm. The queen's eyes scanned them both, and for the first time, Ethan saw something soften in her gaze. "You have done well, human," she said quietly. "Few could survive a night here unarmed. Fewer still could keep my daughter safe, without fear." Ethan tried to smile despite his exhaustion. She made it easy. The queen tilted her head. "Perhaps she chose you." The court gasped at her words, but Ethan could only stare, unsure what they truly meant. The grand hall was packed once again. This time the tension was thicker than ever. Nobles, warriors, advisors, and servants filled every corner. Rumors had spread through the empire. The human who had calmed the queen's baby had passed, the dangerous test of the crystal garden. Now, all awaited the queen's decision. Sergeant Daniel Cross stood at the edge of the hall, his uniform pressed and clean, but his hands still carried the weight of the night he had survived. In his arms, wrapped in soft silvery cloth, was Prince Kale. The baby was awake. Gazing around with bright, curious eyes, Queen Lethera entered the room. Her presence silenced the murmurs instantly. She wore her royal gown, deep teal blue and flowing. Like a river, her crown catching the light like a star. Her eyes scanned the crowd before resting on Daniel. She spoke clearly, her voice strong. "Citizens of Rixara, hear me." The crowd bowed their heads slightly, awaiting her words. "For generations, our empire has been ruled by strength and wisdom. But strength without trust is fragile, and wisdom without heart is cold." Her eyes softened as she looked at Daniel and the baby. "Prince Kale has shown us that even the smallest among us holds great power, and that power can be nurtured. With kindness, with understanding." She paused, then declared, "Sergeant Daniel Cross has proven his courage and loyalty beyond any doubt. He has kept my son safe in the face of danger when others could not." The hall erupted in whispers and gasps. The queen raised her hand for silence. "Therefore I honor my promise." Sergeant Daniel Croce, will you accept my hand in marriage and become consort to the Queen of Rixora? Daniel's heart pounded. He looked down at Cale, then back to the Queen, then across the crowd full of faces, some hostile, some curious, some hopeful. He took a deep breath and nodded. I accept, Your Majesty. Cheer rose from many corners of the hall. But there were still some cold glares from the noble faction that opposed the idea of a human so close to the throne. The Queen smiled and held out her hand. Daniel took it, feeling the weight of history in that moment. The celebration, the court celebration, was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Music from alien instruments filled the air, haunting, beautiful melodies that seemed to echo from the stars themselves. Lights floated like fireflies above the crowd. The Queen and Daniel stood side by side, their smiles genuine despite the tension beneath the surface. Prince Cale clapped his tiny hands, laughing at the colors and sounds. Daniel was surprised by how much he felt like he belonged, not just in the palace, but in this strange, beautiful world. Later, in a quieter chamber, the Queen confided in, Daniel, your courage, your kindness, your strength, these are not common among those who enter my court. Daniel smiled softly. I just did what anyone would do to protect a child, but you did it without fear. That makes all the difference. The truth revealed days passed, and Daniel learned more about the mysterious bond he shared with Cale. 1. Afternoon, the Queen took him to a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace. The walls shimmered with ancient symbols and soft lights. She explained, Prince Cale is not an ordinary child. His sensitivity to emotions is rare, but there is more. He carries the legacy of the ancient Rixaron line. Daniel frowned. Legacy. Yes, long ago. A prophecy spoke of a union between our people and another, a union that would bring balance and strength to the empire. She looked at Daniel meaningfully. You were that union? Daniel swallowed hard. Me? Yes. Your empathy, your human heart, these are exactly what Cale needs, and what this empire needs. Daniel felt both awe and fear. This was bigger than anything he had imagined when he first stepped onto Rixora. Facing opposition, not everyone accepted the Queen's choice easily. A council of nobles met in secret, plotting how to challenge Daniel's new position, they feared. The humans' influence worried that the traditions of Rixira might be lost. But Daniel was not alone. The Queen's loyal warriors, many who had seen Daniel's bravery firsthand, stood by him. Even some nobles who had been skeptical began to respect him in public. Daniel handled challenges with calm and respect, never showing anger, but always standing firm. A new beginning months later. As the twin suns rose over the palace, Daniel stood. On the balcony beside the Queen and Prince Cale, the city below buzzed with new hope. Humans and Rixorans worked side by side, their cultures blending in a way no one had expected. Daniel felt a hand slip into his. The Queen's smile was warm. Together, she said softly, we will lead this empire into a new age. Daniel looked at Cale, who waved a tiny hand at them. And for the first time since he arrived on Rixora, Daniel felt truly at home.